The locations typically seen in the Like a Dragon series exist in large metropolitan areas. Crowded spaces teeming with pedestrians, illuminated by neon and LED lights, and filled with all the amenities a big city can offer. However, in Yakuza 6: The Song of Life, RGG Studio took us to a place that is at the opposite end of that spectrum. Somewhere more quiet, slower paced, and straight out of another era in time. But what does this place look like in real life compared to what we see in-game? Join us as we walk around and take a look at For this segment, we'll begin down here at East Shishido Street in Jingai Ferry Dock. From there, we'll be heading to West Shishido Street, up to Central Shopping District, and then end at the north entrance of Shops Alley. Here in real life, we'll move down to Kaigan-dori and begin our walk proper. It's a bit of a cold February day, but we'll take a pan around here. Nothing super familiar, but we'll begin making our way west, and we'll of course run into our first stop. We'll grab a bite to eat. It's one of the first things I did when I got into town was go on over to Maruboshi. It's right ahead of us, off to the left there. And if we weren't seeing any familiar sights yet, in-game this is Jumangoku Chuka Soba. It's pretty much the same building. Even down to, if I remember correctly, the design on the bowls themselves were very, very similar, if not the same. Maruboshi here serves Onomichi-style ramen, which is soy sauce-based. I believe the soup is made with chicken bones and small fish like niboshi, and it's topped with pork back fat, seiyabura. It's pretty rich tasting, but it's not a very heavy bowl when you end up eating it. We'll go inside. And got some gyoza there. We'll take a good look at the bowl of ramen itself. The interior is also very much a dead ringer, even down to the table placement, as well as the ticket vending machine that's right near the door. It's a bit faded and a little wrinkled, but there is still a poster for the release of Yakuza 6 back in 2016 on the wall there inside the restaurant. Now in-game, the next stop is going to be right next to the ramen shop, but we're going to have to jump up the road a good ways. There's a different shop there. That's Kukai, if I remember correctly, which I thought might have been the shop we were looking for to match up to Jumangoku. But we'll head over here to Fukumoto Ferry. This port will also look very familiar to those who are well-versed in the map for Onomichi. Another spot that is very, very well represented. Even down to the placement of a lot of the vending machines, the bench area there with the shelter that's over top. Really, I'd say the biggest difference you would notice here, aside from a little bit more going on in the background, more cranes, just more objects compared to what's in-game, there's obviously no battleship going on in this area, but I think that's to be expected. Again, a very lovely day. It's a bit cold, but still quite nice. We'll continue heading west here, alongside the waterfront. A little bit longer of a walk from the ferry port to our next spot, compared to what we would see in-game. In-game, like with a lot of the maps, it is quite compressed, but Onomichi in general is kind of a postage stamp compared to a lot of the other maps in the series. And everything's a little bit more spread out here in real life. Not a lot. You could easily walk only a couple of kilometers. Everything's very, very easy to get to, but it is a bit more spread out. I think you'd already be able to tell that there is no Navy apartments. There are apartment buildings around here, for sure, but a lot of them are much newer and certainly not in the same kind of shabby condition that Kiryu's lodgings end up being during his time in Onomichi. The building that is in this spot has a couple of restaurants in it. I think one does curry, the other one does teishoku. You see some of the other buildings around here. I think there might be some hotels. You see the apartment block over there. This is relatively close. Something you don't see in game is the pretty modern looking Onomichi station area. This isn't where the Shinkansen would go, but where the local trains pass through. But it has all the amenities you would kind of expect out of a modern city, compared to in-game where it feels like you're very isolated from the rest of the world. It's a lot closer to what you would expect out of any city in Japan that you would visit in this day and age. This section here, this does not have any game footage. This is just a little bit extra. Heading up this alleyway, we'll be going into the Fukumoto area. I think also part of the Nakashotengai area as well. These are both sections of the overall Onomichi Hondori shopping street that runs about 1.2 kilometers and also connects up with Sentagai, or Center Street, which we will definitely be taking a look at here in a few minutes. Take a look over here, and we'll also be coming back right this way in a moment as well. That's the entranceway into the Hondori. We'll take a look around here as well before we hop back up this way and take a look at another spot that we can find in game. You can already see some of the Showa era elements are still alive and well on this shopping street. It's pretty quiet on this day. I think most things were either closed or just hadn't opened up yet for the business day. Back up to the Hondori entrance that we were already near. We will make our way to Oyatsu-to-Yamaneko. You should know it better as Snacks and Wildcats, serving things like milk pudding. They are quite famous for that. I have a friend that lives in Kanagawa Prefecture that visited here specifically because they were quite famous. I was really looking forward to being able to try it out and maybe even take some back home with me. However, on this day, they were closed. Thankfully, they are not closed for business permanently, but they had nothing listed on the windows, nothing listed on their Instagram. I showed up, checked it out later that afternoon, and nothing. So maybe next time I'll be able to try out the pudding. We'll see. For our last stop in this section of the walk, we'll head back over closer to where Maruboshi was and take a look around. Still a number of differences. Although when we get a little bit over to the right here, you can see the building there on the corner. I believe that's a shop in real life. It's a spot for a sub-story there in game, but it's not somewhere you can actually go inside of. Make sure we cross the street proper. Be a good Samaritan. But we'll make our way over towards Sentagai, or Center Street. We'd already seen Fukumoto and Nakashotengai, all a part of the overall Onomichi Hondori shopping street. This one's important to us since it's actually recreated in game. I believe the entire street itself has history dating back to the 1940s. It had expansions in the 1960s, back when Shotengai and shopping streets were a lot more important. They're still pretty important today, but a lot have died over the years. But this one's seen some revitalization since the 1990s. You can see that elsewhere in Japan, trying to preserve some of its history and make sure these are still around and serving the local businesses and the local residents. A little bit of differences, a little bit more ornate on that sign in-game, but the color schemes are the same, the text is the same. The name's exactly the same, but I think that's more just kind of a general one. I wouldn't be surprised if the team was working with the city itself to get some of this in-game. This is a weird shop. I think they're selling airsoft weapons, but always interesting to see. There's no shop names on the signage in-game, but the design's almost exactly the same, as well as with the the skylight windows there on the roof. None of the shops, I believe, are recreated in-game, but if you pay enough attention, you'll see that RGG Studios and their map designers did attempt to recreate some of it, at least in spirit. You see off to the left here. The signs are different, but they're really close. They're trying to go for that look and feel. And one thing that you actually will end up encountering, although I would suggest not trying to use them at any point, are access ladders. Leave those for Kiryu to be able to access the roof when he needs to get away from bad guys or something else is going on. But I love walking down shopping streets like this, especially if they're playing nice soft music and it's not super busy. Some can be very, very busy, but some can be nice leisurely strolls and you can check out what they have to offer to folks out there. We won't be able to find anybody selling us tofu here that may have also ran Pocket Circuit. But this will lead us out to National Route 2 in real life. We'll take a look around here a little bit and get a bit of an idea of where we're going to be heading next as we continue our walk through Onomichi. In-game, we'll jump from Shops Alley to East National Route 2 and head up the Pedestrian Footbridge. From there, we'll pass through parts of Hilltop Path and First Hill over to Ryunan Shrine, and down the Ryunan Shrine stairwell back to street level. In real life, we'll pick up from where we left off and go a little west to find our own version of the Pedestrian Footbridge. Let's get ourselves up these stairs and get a bit of a vantage point over National Route 2 here. If stairs are something that give you trouble, on the north side of the street there is a ramp that could be used for wheelchairs and bikes and whatnot. A lot like what you would actually see in-game. You do have to cross at one of the crosswalks. There's one to the east and one to the west. You can pick whichever one you want to use there. So you kind of have to go a little bit out of the way, but if it saves you the issue of having to go upstairs, it's worth it and something to bear in mind. It's not much of a vantage point, I guess. You're not really getting a big view. The better view is up on the mountain. But it is kind of neat to see everything below, see the traffic, and just kind of hang out and people watch for a little while. Like how it appears in game, I believe this section right here is kind of a newer footbridge that connects over to this one. You kind of have to step off of one, go up a bit of stairs, and then it connects to the north side of the street. I guess newer is more relative in this case. They've probably been there for quite some time. With the train tracks here, in-game there is an equivalent to the JR West Sanyo main line. That's a cheaper option to get from Hiroshima City to Onomichi if you have a bit more time, if you don't want to take the Shinkansen. I didn't get to see anything like that on this day, but I did spot a JR Freight Class EF210 hauling a bunch of cargo. I guess this footbridge is also good if you like trains like myself and you want to hang out for a little while and see them pass by. Now, as we enter into this next area, things will start to diverge a good bit. I had a pretty hard time trying to nail down any one particular shrine or temple or any pathway around here, because there's a good bit going on. Anything that would really match up to what we see in-game. And of course, the time I had to research as well as explore and film here was pretty limited, so I'm trying to do my best with what we have available. The site we're walking into here, so I'm just going to display the kanji as well as the two readings I got out of Google Translate because they are different. I don't know for sure which one would be correct on this. If you know better than me, and I'm sure there's folks out there that do, please leave a comment down below. That way we know which one might be correct. There was some construction going on around here But some pretty nice construction workers that were letting me pass through. Very friendly chaps, putting up with me and my camera. We will see another temple as part of the pathway we're taking here in real life that I think looks a lot closer to Yunnan Shrine in-game. And a question I believe a lot of you out there may end up having is, what is the difference between shrines and temples? The easiest way to boil it down is, when you see something called a shrine, it's going to be a part of the Shinto faith, whereas temples will be Buddhist. There are some immediate architectural differences that can be noticed between them, such as how buildings are designed or how the entryways into the shrines or temples appear. Though, with the way Japan kind of works, they're pretty well intermingled. They coexist peacefully alongside each other, and they've been there a long time. So sometimes you may go into a temple and see Shinto stuff. If you're looking at it on Google Maps, the really easy way to know which is which, if you see a manji on it, it's going to be Buddhist. If you see a torii gate on the map location, it's going to be Shinto. Cemeteries, I think, are another way to know if it's a Buddhist temple. I don't think Shinto shrines have cemeteries on their grounds. Going down this pathway, I believe a lot of these are houses, and that was something that gave me pause, since I didn't want to film a whole lot around residential areas for privacy concerns, obviously. So I'm not really stopping and taking a big look around. Plus, for the most part, the pathways we see in-game are relatively short, so you don't have to worry about it too much. There were some cafes and little restaurants in the general area I was covering here in real life, but nothing that stood out to me that looked like La Pente that you see in Yakuza 6 where you do clan creator stuff at. There is a spot closer to Senkōji Park up on the top of the mountain that might be an analog to this, a place called Petit that I wasn't aware of until after my visit was over. It looks like a small cozy spot, pretty similar to what you see at La Pente, but if you end up visiting the area, that might be the closest thing you can find to what you see in-game. Our pathway leads us over to the temple I was mentioning earlier. Aside from some story segments and fights, we really don't learn a whole lot about Yunnan Shrine in-game, so as we enter Jikōji Temple here, we'll go over some of the history related to it. There's no established date for when this temple was founded and built. It was being run by a different Buddhist sect up till about the Muromachi period. That'd be between 1336 and 1573. At that point, it changed hands. It does house some national treasures and important historical objects related to the Hiroshima and Onomichi area. There's a silk painting of Fugen Enmei that dates back to the Heian period, so that's about 250 years, I think, prior to when this place had changed hands. You can kind of see it a little bit over there. We'll get a better view here in a moment. There are some Jizo statues and everything around the grounds. I'm not sure if you get any buffs if you leave behind anything as an offering to them, like Kiryu can. I didn't see a box around here. There might be one up there at the entrance that you can throw money into. That seems like more of a Shinto thing to do, but as mentioned, sometimes between temples and shrines, there's some intermingling of ideas. The Jizo statue are different compared to in-game, but every place that has them, there's something unique about them. And from here, there's not a whole lot else to take a look at. We'll start making our way down. Not a massive staircase, there's at least some flatland. And a very small yappy dog that was hanging out that day, belonging to someone that was living around here. I think that might be an apartment building off to the right-hand side of our path. Yeah, I wish I could have covered this area a little bit more and a little bit better, but ultimately with the time limitations and my own knowledge, as well as just not wanting to be a nuisance to anybody that was living around here, it made it tough. But, you know, you make do with the hand that you have dealt to you, and you try your best with what you have available. Once we get back down to street level, We'll head back over towards the shopping streets we were already at and check out some areas adjacent to them as we continue our exploration around Onomichi. For this section, we'll begin back at the entrance for Central Shopping District, then head east along Jingai Main Street and into the heart of Hana-no-Kubo. We'll make a whirlwind trip around this district before heading up North Hana-no-Kubo and ending at East National Route 2. Back here in real life, we'll begin at the bottom of the staircase leading away from Jikōji Temple and make our way back over to Hondori Center Street. In-game, we really don't have to go more than a few steps and we'll find ourselves in Hana-no-Kubo, but in real life, to get to the area we're looking at, oddly enough called Kubo, we got to go about half a kilometer. We walk at a decent speed. It's maybe 10 minutes from our starting point, so not terribly far, but it gives us an opportunity to look at more of the Hondori shopping street. We looked at that a little bit already, but there's so little of it represented in-game, it gives us a chance to kind of take the sights in a little bit more. See some of the shops. It's still not a super busy day. As you can see, it is big enough to fit cars. I didn't see a lot of them, but you will run into vehicles, and thankfully if your hearing's keen enough, you'll be able to hear the tires behind you and you get out of the way pretty quickly. They usually don't end up using horns. That'd be a bit of a nuisance. Oh look, a Lawson. See, they have Konbini here. I know they wanted to make Onomichi seem really small, but even the smallest places in Japan have Konbini these days. So we're coming up to where we have to make a right-hand turn past this building to the right here, down Mizuocho Street. And that will lead us to the first part we'll be looking at in Hana-no-Kubo, where a few story sections end up taking place. A little spot named Yume-Koji, or I believe that translates to Dream Alley for that name. It's a little bit hard to see right now. Oh, there's a car right there. Probably a business owner, most likely, but as small as those streets are, when you're walking around, you really need to be aware, but you're almost kind of like wire cars here. I've gone on about that before. And off to our left here is Yume Kaido, or it kind of translates to Dream Highway. I'm not sure if that's a decent enough translation, but it serves the same purpose as Yume Koji in-game, where Moreno is at. This is a complex that has a number of snack bars and clubs, different places to drink and eat. Kubo, with everything I was able to see around that day, is a decent-sized nightlife district, and pretty decently represented too, with some of the, well, maybe not right there, with some of the older buildings still in place, but like the really thin-looking neon signage, that still looks straight out of the Showa era. Even the building designs too just give off an air of a building that's been there for 30, 40 years at this point. And turning back around, we'll find ourselves at Yonetoku, the exact same restaurant in-game as here in real life. I'm not sure about the menu. It's a place that's only open for dinner, and by the time I was going to be leaving, I would have already have been gone at least an hour or so by the time they would have opened up. So it was not a spot I was able to partake in, but something to look forward to the next time I'm there. Now we're going to be heading a bit northeast here. This is kind of the northern boundary street of Hana-no-Kubo, going over towards the Hirose family office. As we keep going forward, we'll eventually come to a red brick building that you will see in game that kind of leads out into National Route 2 again. Unfortunately, there's no Hirose family office around in this area, or any Yakuza office for that matter. I'm not entirely certain they would be advertising anything, or it'd be an obvious place that you would go, oh, hey, there's a organized crime unit that bases their operation out of here. And with the strict laws that are in place towards groups like that and folks that associate with it, I imagine a lot of them are going to try to hide in plain sight, or I think some of them also end up portraying themselves as legitimate businesses, or they have legitimate businesses as fronts to be able to hide the stuff they don't want people to see. In-game, the Yomei Alliance is the big group we deal with around here in Onomichi and just in the Hiroshima area in general. In real life, the big groups around these parts are the Kyosei Kai and the Kyodo Kai. The Kyodo Kai are the group that's based here within Onomichi. Their history actually dates back to just after World War II. There was a group called the Takahashi Gumi that had broken up by about 1969, and the senior members of that group ended up forming the Kyodo Kai. The Kyosei Kai, I think, are based out of Hiroshima and are probably the most well-known out of the two, with some of their activities, I think, feeding into the overall image of Hiroshima being a kind of a dangerous place for organized crime, something that I don't think is much of a problem these days, but used to be back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we'll head back over towards Yonetoku, and we'll start heading south and southeast here, roughly over to where Snack Kiyomi is, since our route takes us kind of past where that technically would be if it existed in real life. I do wonder, as we see these parking lots here, what might have been there in the old days. I was looking at some older films, and I realized there's a lot of old buildings, even back in the spots that we saw when we began our walk. Stuff along the waterfront that's long gone. Things that would look a lot closer to the Navy apartments. So there is some basis in reality for why that looked the way it did. And for whatever reason, rounding the corner here, it's a feeling I've had multiple times in the past, going through Kabukicho, Dotonbori, parts of Yokohama, where you're just kind of taken aback and you're like, oh wow, I'm really here right now. This is happening. Even if it doesn't entirely match what we see in game, it's so close and it just catches you by surprise. It's a feeling I hope a lot of fans of the series end up having in the future. If they ever get the opportunity to be able to come to Onomichi or any other area that's been represented in the series and realize, yeah, these aren't just completely make-believe places. They're real, living, breathing spots. And you can come here, you can experience it, and you can gain so much more out of a series that, hey, yeah, it's given you lots of hours of gameplay, but look at what it can enrich your life with. Oop, hold on. Yeah, that'll happen too in the small streets. At least the scooters are loud enough, you're aware of them coming up behind you. In-game, the footage will jump back out to the street. This is more to try to line it up with one of the other alleyways to keep it as in line as possible. There's not a whole lot to say around here, but it's more about just trying to capture the feeling. I don't even know if I was technically allowed to be walking around here, but I imagine folks that live here, they probably use these alleyways, at least during the daytime. I don't know how hectic or how bad it would be at nighttime. In the daytime, though, if this could serve as a shortcut to go to different places a little bit quicker. Thankfully, I didn't have to fight that piece of machinery. That's good. We'll exit out of this alleyway. We've been near the building to the right here, the white building that looks like it's made out of tiles. If you pay attention to stuff off to the left-hand side, this doorway with the shade over it and the parking lot, even tiny insignificant things like the gutters there. I got very lucky managing to find a street that matched up as well as it does. Good stroke of luck on my part. Seeing the game footage down there. Hi, Snack New Gaudi. Again, it's something I want to do the next time I'm in Japan. I need to find somebody that has a better grasp of the language than I do. Be a lot more helpful to go into a snack bar with someone that can communicate a little bit easier and not just walk in and be like, hi, my Japanese is pretty bad. Let me try to actually have a conversation with you, because that's the whole point going into a snack bar. Having the conversation, hanging out with people, and if you can't communicate with them, it really diminishes the entire experience. But we'll see what happens with that here in 2025. Once we get up to this T section here, we'll make a left-hand turn and make our way back over to the red brick building that we saw earlier. That'll be our last stop for this section. It's not a whole lot here in-game. I believe a sub-story starts in the little courtyard there, and Otofuku Pond is nearby. But you're not going to get a whole lot else other than street fights, but you tend to run into a lot of those in the back alleys of Hanano-Kubo. And safes and keys, and that one guy that sells you black market items. This section here in real life, I don't know if it has a name. I did a bit of looking, and there's a number of buildings around here, but not a whole lot of hits. The buildings themselves may have some names attached to them, like for the clubs or eating establishments, pubs, and whatnot. But the little area itself, I'm unsure about. It does stand out even compared to the rest of it with some of the Showa era designs and being a little bit gaudy. These kind of crank it up a bit more with the color schemes, but I can appreciate that. I like an area with some character. In game down there, we're just about at the end of this section of our walk. And in real life too, as we meet back up once again with National Route 2. And it actually brings us pretty close to the end of our walk in general. There's only one more major area that I want to show you, but that's going to require a bit of different transportation. We've been on foot most of this time, and we need to head up a mountain, which you can go up on foot if you want to, but I think we have something different in mind. Something that will give us a much higher vantage point as we continue to look around and get near the end of our walk here in Onomichi. For the last part of our walk here in-game, we'll start at North Hanano-Kubo and cross the street over to the ropeway station. From there, we'll take the ropeway all the way up the mountain to reach Senkōji Temple and the surrounding areas. And back here in real life, we'll begin from where we left off at National Route 2 and go a little bit west to bring ourselves closer to the ropeway station. We're facing a slightly different direction down there in-game, but it's pointing us to the right way, to our ropeway station. We need that to get up the mountain. It is always weird. It's not a big tunnel, but tunnels like that kind of freak me out, especially with the train tracks above. But it wasn't running at that point, so thankful for that. It's not a lot in this particular section. We'll come back over towards Mount Senkōji ropeway station. We're going to duck off to a side street here off to the left that has an equivalent in-game. It'll at least give us some time to go over the history of the ropeway station. The ropeway began service back in 1957, and for about 500 yen, I think it was ever so slightly cheaper when I was here in 2023, but as of 2025, it's about 500 yen. That'll take you straight up the mountain. It takes about 3 to 4 minutes. Not a bad ride. It's a little cramped in the cars. If you want to avoid trying to take the hilly pathways to go up the mountain, it'll save you some time. Then you can just make your way back down the mountain on foot like I did. This was a small little excursion. I hadn't quite mapped it out, and in-game it's only a couple of little side alleyways and streets. But I figured it'd be neat to see. There is one thing I didn't point out in previous parts. Since in Onomichi in-game you can end up finding a lot of cats that you can send to the cat cafe back in Kamurocho. Didn't find a lot of cats in my trip here, but I did find one little friend. Seemed like it was an older cat, but they were pretty chill. They let me pet them. As we make our way back over towards the ropeway station, I'm sure there's a question that's been lingering in the minds of some of you, and that is, where's our good friend Onomichio, the character mascot of Onomichi? Unfortunately, well, he only exists in the game world as well as in our hearts and minds. But that's not to say that there aren't some character mascots that are citrus-themed around the Hiroshima and Onomichi areas. Here in Onomichi, there are character mascots like Monmon Lemon-chan and Nyamon, which does make sense considering the whole area itself around Onomichi and Hiroshima is famous for Setouchi lemons. Over in Hiroshima, they do have a lemon-scented bear named Hirokuma, and quite honestly, all three of them are just absolutely cute, so you at least have something to pick from as a good replacement here in real life for Onomichio. We'll buy our ticket here and make our way up to the platform. It looks like you can kind of go there by the staircase to the left of the ticket office. We don't really get to see that in-game, but here in real life, we go around the right-hand side of the building and take the elevator there, and that'll take us up to the boarding platform. And from there, we'll zip line up the mountain, basically. Again, it's a little cramped, but you get an amazing view of the trees. And as you start to head up a bit further, you'll get to see the coastline around the Seto Inland Sea, and it'll take you right over Senkōji Temple, which we'll be back to here in a few minutes after we get up to the top of the mountain and look around there. And we'll say hi to our little station masters here who are welcoming us to Onomichi and still repping Yakuza 6 of all things. Good for them. It is a good game. I think it gets a bit of a bad rap, but that's just me. We'll head out from the station and up the stairs to go to what is pretty much the top of the mountain. Take either the stairs or the elevator, depending upon your preference. And this is where things start to diverge pretty heavily from what we see in-game. Even though we can't go into the observation area there, we can see it off in the distance. What we see there is kind of like a flying saucer, very retro-futuristic, with a little walkway up on the top that gives you a panoramic view around the area. And up until probably about 2020 or 2021, that was the building that existed here in real life that really now you can only see through Google Maps. But as of March 2022, that old observation building was torn down, and what we have here is the new Peak Observatory, all capitals, P-E-A-K, and via the staircase or the elevator, that takes you about 13 meters off the ground. You see, even on the stairs, we're starting to get a pretty nice view. And it was starting to get cloudy. If you haven't noticed it already, there was just the lightest touch of snow that was starting to come down. So keep on the lookout for that. It's amazing. It's not even the best view. Because once you get up to the observation level, that's where the really, really nice views start to kick in. As you can tell from my real-time reaction as I reach the top. Holy shit. I can see why this is a pretty popular spot to head to, and I can only imagine what it looks like at night. Here in the daytime, my God, it's so gorgeous. And is well worth the trip out to Onomichi and paying that 500 yen to go to the top of the mountain. Like, you wouldn't be able to do much here on the observation level for that long, especially if it's crowded. But there's a park nearby and restaurants that I mentioned back in the earlier part of our walk. But I cannot highly recommend it enough for folks to come see this in person. I don't think I did it any justice showing it to you here, but if it motivates you to make the trip even more, then I think I've done my job. And just to show that I actually was here in person, hello. We'll take the elevator back down to, I say the ground, we're still on the mountain, obviously. And from here, we'll enter something that has an equivalent in-game, but not quite in the same way. During the course of Yakuza 6, you will run into a bunch of different stones that have poetry carved in them. There's 9 of them spread throughout the Onomichi map, and they do factor into part of the game's story towards the end. I'm not going to give any spoilers away, even though it's been out for a little while. So even though it's slightly different, it's kind of neat that they worked something like this into the game in some meaningful manner. Here in real life, there are poetry stones here on the mountain that form what is called the Bungaku no Kōmichi. Kind of translates as either literary alley or literature path. I chose to go with literature path, it kind of sounded better. And even though there's only 9 of them in-game, for the 1 kilometer that you take from the top of the mountain down to Senkōji Temple, you run into about 25 of them. And I couldn't tell you what's actually written on them since my reading comprehension in Japanese is not great. But I do believe that some of the poetry written on these stones, those authors are represented in-game as well, folks like Iwaya Sazanami and Jipensha Iku. Though I still wouldn't be entirely sure if what they show in-game that's attributed to those authors is what you would find here on the literature path. It takes about, I'd say, 15 minutes. I'm kind of a fast walker, but it took me about 15 minutes to make my way down to Senkōji Temple. I'm only showing so much of this part here, but like with the ropeway video, I'll leave a link down below to an unlisted video that'll show the walk in its entirety if you want to view it. This is one of the last little stops before we turn back around and take the staircase down to Senkōji Temple, which will be the final stop for this walk. It was pretty much the final stop of the day. Ended up going through here and then taking the stairs and the pathway back down to street level, and not long afterwards catching a bus back over to the train station and make my way back over to Hiroshima City, where I was staying at that time. Kind of weird going into this area. You can see the aircon units off to the left-hand side there, and then off to the right, you're like, oh, hey, some of this stuff's been here a really long time. Senkōji Temple's been here actually for quite some time too, being founded back in the year 806. It's the 10th stop on the Chugoku Sanju-san Kanon pilgrimage trail that starts in Okayama Prefecture. That's just northeast of Hiroshima Prefecture. Cuts back through Hiroshima and goes through the prefectures of Yamaguchi, Shimane, and Tottori. There's not a lot of people in this part of it, but as you get into Senkōji itself, that's where all the people start to congregate, as you'd expect. It's a pretty popular tourist spot, even though it's a temple. You can see all the little knickknacks and other things around here. It actually got busy. I didn't film a lot over in the temple building itself. There was a lot of people over in that area. I did get a little self-conscious, and I didn't want to be rude filming strangers. I'm sure photos of different things would have been fine, but filming people's faces and whatnot, and certainly being on religious grounds, I try not to be a nuisance. And it was a little bit cramped anyways, so that made it a bit hard. And since it was near the end of my day here, I think it was kind of speeding up, so my apologies for not having quite as much footage of this area as I would like. One last view around. We'll look at a couple of small spots here on the grounds of Senkōji. As I said, not long after this, I headed back down the mountain and made my way back to Hiroshima. I really wish I had a lot more time here in Onomichi. I spent about 6 hours overall. Pretty whirlwind trip. I know in the future when I come back, and I'd love to come back for sure, I'd like to book at least 2 or 3 days just to really explore the area again. You can see the snow there. It's a pretty wet snow. It almost looks like rain. It snowed when I went through Kyoto too a couple days later. From here, though, we'll make our way back over to the stairs and find ourselves at the end of our walk here in Onomichi. As we bring things to a close here for this series, I just want to talk a little bit kind of off the cuff. I'll be honest, I was unsure if this series ever actually would get made or at least get finished. I did all the filming back in 2023 as my trip to Hiroshima was a side journey, a sub-story, if you will. Once the Yokohama series was over, I took about a month off. And as life tends to do to you, I just kind of hit a wall on everything. I think I burned out a little bit on the series, and I was maybe not as prepared mentally to take on a large editing project so soon after finishing Yokohama. There was other things going on at that time too, which thankfully have kind of mellowed out. But for about 6 or 7 months, this just sat unfinished, unfortunately. But here at the start of 2025, when I'm recording this and when all of this is starting to come out, I don't know, I found my mojo again, and that's when it started to gel, and the more things started to come together, the more motivation I found out of that. And now we're here. Over a year later after starting this series, it's finally coming to a close, and it's the end of a 2-year journey. Like from the point in which I started planning everything out and filming Yokohama, it still took 9 or 10 months to put all that together. And it's now almost February 2025 when I'm recording this. To be honest, I don't want to cry as I'm recording this, obviously, but it is a little bit emotional to bring all of this full circle and to finally see all this through to the end. Let me take the time to thank everybody. If you left comments over on AFC Presents Yokohama or some of the older videos, even back to the one I did in 2018, the original Kamurocho Kabukicho comparison, I don't know how that still keeps getting views. It's not very good, but I really appreciate all of those. Even if I don't necessarily comment back on that, I do read them, I see them. I've seen folks with the Yokohama series that have used it in their own trip to Yokohama and around Naka Ward there. It's kind of crazy to think that something I made is actually kind of helping people enjoy that more. It's hard to describe. Let's just kind of leave it that way. And if you do make your way out to Onomichi yourself, and I really hope you do, I hope this gives you some extra motivation to make the trip there if you can make your way into Japan and you have enough time to travel down to Hiroshima Prefecture. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear the stories about your visit there and what you did. I just love seeing people get out there and explore these places for themselves. So until our paths cross again, take care of yourselves, take care of the people around you, and we'll say our final goodbye to our friends here in Onomichi.